In 1969, NASCAR was in the middle of an all-out war, Ford versus Chrysler, horsepower versus aerodynamics, engineers versus engineers. Every team was throwing everything they had at the rulebook, trying to find an edge before the next race weekend. Cars were getting faster. Speeds were approaching 200 miles per hour, and every loophole that existed, someone was already exploiting it. It seemed impossible that in a garage full of geniuses, one man could still find something nobody else had thought of. But then a car pulled into the Daytona pits with exhaust pipes pointed in a direction nobody had ever tried. It was completely legal. It won the race. And it was banned before the sun went down. This is the story of Junior Johnson's 1969 Firecracker 400 car. The story of this car begins not in a garage, but in a boardroom. By the mid-1960s, NASCAR had drifted far from its roots. The days of buying a car off the showroom floor and driving it straight to the track were over. Manufacturers had taken over: Ford, Chrysler, Mercury. They each wanted to win on Sunday because it sold cars on Monday, and they were spending millions to make it happen. The first real shot in what would become known as the Aero Wars was fired in 1966, when Junior Johnson himself built a car that shocked the NASCAR garage. The car driven by Fred Lorenzen at Atlanta's Dixie 400 had a front end that sloped downward, a lowered roofline, narrowed side windows, and a tail that kicked upward. Other drivers took one look at it and started calling it names: the Yellow Banana, Junior's Joke, the Magna Fluxed Monster. It was so radical that even though it was legal, it looked like nothing else on the track. Lorenzen led the race before crashing out, and the car never raced again. But Junior Johnson had made his point. Aerodynamics mattered, and he was willing to go further than anyone else to use them. By 1968, the real war had started. Chrysler engineers looked at the standard Dodge Charger body and saw a problem. The recessed grille and tunneled rear window were creating enormous drag and lift at the speeds these cars were approaching. Their answer was the 1969 Charger 500, with a flush grille and a smooth rear window. It was a significant improvement. Ford already knew it was coming. So Ford did what Ford always did in that era. They went to work quietly, and they went to work fast. The result was the 1969 Ford Torino Talladega. Ford needed to produce at least 500 of these cars and sell them to the public to satisfy NASCAR's homologation rules. They built 754 units in a 5-week window in early 1969. The Talladega had a specially extended nose, a flush front end, and a slicker overall shape that cut through air more cleanly than anything Ford had ever put on a racetrack. It was named after the brand new Alabama superspeedway that was about to become the fastest track in the world. The message was clear. Ford intended to own that place. The Talladega was an immediate weapon. On the big superspeedway tracks, Ford teams put together a 13-race winning streak at the start of 1969. LeeRoy Yarbrough won the Daytona 500 in February, driving one of these cars for Junior Johnson. David Pearson won 11 races that season in the Talladega on his way to the championship. The car was so dominant that it forced Chrysler to accelerate their own program and produce the radical wing Dodge Daytona. a car so extreme it looked like it had landed from another planet. The Aero Wars were at full speed. Every team was trying to find an edge within the rules, and some were trying to find one outside of them. And in that environment, Junior Johnson was the most dangerous man in the garage to understand what happened at the 1969 Firecracker 400. You first have to understand who Junior Johnson was. Robert Glenn Johnson Jr. was born in 1931 in Ingle Hollow, Wilkes County, North Carolina. Wilkes County had a nickname in those days, the moonshine capital of the world. His father operated what was considered one of the largest copper stills in the state of North Carolina. And Junior grew up around both farming and illegal liquor running. He was making bootleg deliveries in his father's truck by the time he was 14 years old. Junior Johnson was never caught on the road. The law could never catch him. He once drove straight through a coordinated police roadblock, passing them with a siren half a car length behind him, and simply disappeared into the night. He was eventually convicted in 1956, not because anyone caught him driving, but because authorities staked out his father's still. He served 11 months in federal prison. When he came back out, he went racing. And he brought everything he had learned on those dirt back roads with him. Junior Johnson became one of the most feared drivers in NASCAR. Winning 50 races before retiring from driving in 1966. He won the 1960 Daytona 500 in a car that was 22 miles per hour, slower than the fastest cars in the field. Simply because he discovered drafting during practice and used it better than anyone else had ever thought to. He found a faster car in the slipstream during a test run, noticed his own speed increase significantly, and turned that observation into a race-winning strategy. The technique is standard practice in every form of motorsport today. In 1965, writer Tom Wolfe profiled him in Esquire magazine and called him the last American hero. The title stuck, but as a car owner, Johnson was even more dangerous than he had been as a driver, because now he had time to think. And Junior Johnson thinking about a rule book was a problem for everyone else in the garage. His crew chief for the 1969 season was Herb Nab. By any measure, Nab was one of the finest crew chiefs in the sport. He had led Fred Lorenzen to NASCAR's first $100,000 season back in 1963. He was precise, inventive, and deeply trusted. The combination of Johnson's willingness to push boundaries and Nab's ability to execute was the most potent partnership in the garage. Their driver was LeeRoy Yarbrough. LeeRoy Yarbrough was a Jacksonville, Florida high school dropout who built his first race car out of a 1933 Ford Street Roadster at the age of 16. His first time out in that car, he won a feature race at Jacksonville Speedway. He knocked around the lower levels of racing for years, winning more than 100 sportsman and modified features before making his way to the NASCAR Grand National Series. Yarbrough had raw speed, undeniable, natural, sometimes reckless speed. He had struggled to find the right team for most of his career, winning only occasionally and never threatening for a championship. Junior Johnson himself said it plainly. LeeRoy had the most raw talent I've ever seen, but talent without direction rarely wins championships. In October of 1967, Johnson hired him. Herb Nab came with the deal as crew chief. The 1968 season was described by those close to the team as a learning year. Johnson and Nab were figuring out how to manage Yarbrough's personality while developing their Ford program. The year produced 2 wins at Trenton and Atlanta, and then came 1969. LeeRoy Yarbrough in 1969 was arguably the most dominant superspeedway driver in NASCAR history. He won the Daytona 500 in February. He won the Rebel 400 at Darlington. He won the World 600 at Charlotte. He would go on to win the Southern 500 at Darlington in September, making him the first driver ever to win NASCAR's informal Triple Crown in a single season, 7 wins that year. American Driver of the Year. But the Firecracker 400 on July 4th was different, because for that race, Junior Johnson and Herb Nab had been thinking on every NASCAR car in 1969, the exhaust pipes exited from the sides of the car. That was standard. That was the way it had always been done. Exhaust went out the side, behind the front wheels, pointing toward the ground. Nobody questioned it, because nobody had thought of a reason to. Junior Johnson had a reason. He and Herb Nab redirected the exhaust pipes to exit from the rear of the car, pointing directly backward down the track. On the surface, this accomplished 2 things. First, it added a measurable boost in horsepower. When exhaust exits from the side, there is back pressure working against the engine. Routing the pipes to the rear allowed the exhaust gases to exit more cleanly and more efficiently, freeing up additional power. Not a dramatic amount, but at 180 miles per hour, any additional horsepower matters. But the second effect was the more diabolical one. When Yarbrough's car ran at speed, hot exhaust gases blasted straight backward out the rear of the car at high velocity. Any car trying to draft closely behind the number 98, Ford was not just encountering normal turbulent air. It was running directly into a stream of hot, dirty, chemically aggressive exhaust gases. The air hitting the front of the trailing car was disrupted and contaminated. The aerodynamic seal that drafting depends on was broken. Competitors could not get close enough to set up a run. LeeRoy Yarbrough ran clean air all day while everyone chasing him ran through a moving wall of exhaust on July 4th, 1969. At Daytona International Speedway, LeeRoy Yarbrough dominated the Firecracker 400. He led 96 of the 160 laps and held off Buddy Baker by nearly a full second at the finish. It was not particularly close. The Firecracker 400 was run on Independence Day, in the Florida heat, in front of a packed grandstand at Daytona. The 1969 NASCAR season already belonged to the Junior Johnson team in the eyes of anyone paying attention. Yarbrough had won the Daytona 500 at this same track 5 months earlier. The Ford Talladega was the fastest car on any long track NASCAR visited. And Herb Nab had won the World Pit Crew Championship earlier that year with his team's precision in the pits. The question coming into the Firecracker was whether anyone could challenge them. The answer on that day was effectively no. Yarbrough ran with authority from early in the race. The exhaust trick that Johnson and Nab had quietly installed was invisible to spectators and difficult for competitors to understand while it was happening. Drivers chasing the number 98 car found themselves unable to generate the close quarters runs that drafting on a super speedway requires. The air behind Yarbrough's Ford was not the clean, predictable air they were expecting. It was disrupted, hot, and pushing back. Buddy Baker gave him the most serious challenge, finishing second. Eventual season champion David Pearson came home fourth. Yarbrough won by nearly a second, which at Daytona speeds represented a significant margin. It was only after the race. When competitors and NASCAR officials began examining what had made the 98 car so difficult to follow, that the exhaust routing became the obvious answer. It was completely legal. There was no rule that said exhaust pipes had to exit from the sides of the car. Junior Johnson had read the rule book. The rule book had nothing to say about it. NASCAR had plenty to say about it. The move brought back memories of Junior Johnson's own history of finding things the rule book had not yet thought to prohibit. The yellow banana in 1966 had been legal. The smooth underbody he had run years earlier had been legal. Drafting itself had been completely legal when he discovered it. Johnson had a pattern of finding things that were real, that worked, and that nobody had thought to write a rule against. After the Firecracker 400, NASCAR moved quickly. The rear-facing exhaust was banned. Going forward, all exhaust systems would be required to exit from the sides of the car, as had always been the custom. The rule was written specifically to close the door that the number 98 Ford had walked through on July 4th. It was a door that had only been open for one race. Junior Johnson had gotten exactly what he needed from it. The 1969 season ended with LeeRoy Yarbrough as one of the most celebrated drivers in the country. 7 wins, the Triple Crown. American Driver of the Year. He seemed to be at the start of what should have been a long championship run. But the story ended in tragedy. In 1970, a hard crash during tire testing at Texas World Speedway rattled Yarbrough badly and left him disoriented in ways that would never fully resolve. He couldn't remember Cale Yarbrough picking him up in Texas days later and flying him home. He couldn't remember flying to Martinsville or running the race there. The damage was already done. His behavior changed. His personality changed. He struggled through 1970 and attempted several returns, but the driver who had dominated 1969 was already gone in the ways that mattered most. He was drinking heavily. The memory problems were worsening. On February 13, 1980, something finally broke entirely. Yarbrough attacked his own mother and nearly choked her to death. He was declared incompetent to stand trial and committed to a Florida mental institution. His family said that the 1970 crash had changed everything about who he was. His mother forgave him and said she still loved her son. But that wasn't him anymore. On December 6, 1984, LeeRoy Yarbrough had a violent seizure and struck his head. He died that day. He was 46 years old. He is one of the most talented and most overlooked drivers in the history of the sport. Junior Johnson retired from racing as a car owner in 1995, having won 132 races across a career that spanned more than 4 decades. His drivers won 6 NASCAR championships. He was inducted into the NASCAR Hall of Fame in its inaugural class in 2010, alongside Bill France Sr., Bill France Jr., Dale Earnhardt, and Richard Petty. There is an 8.5-mile stretch of highway in North Carolina named the Junior Johnson Highway. In 1986, President Ronald Reagan granted him a full presidential pardon for his 1956 moonshining conviction. Johnson said he could not have imagined anything better. The rear exhaust trick from the 1969 Firecracker 400 is a single footnote in a career that contains dozens of innovations and exploits that changed how the sport understood itself. But it stands out for a particular reason, in a sport where aerodynamics would eventually become the central battlefield. Johnson had found a way to weaponize his own exhaust against the cars behind him. He had turned a waste product into a competitive advantage. He had used something every car on the track produced, routed it differently, and won a race that nobody else could win that day. It was completely legal, and the rule against it was written before the checkered flag had fully settled. That, more than anything, was Junior Johnson's signature: not breaking rules, finding the space between them, and winning there before anyone else realized the space existed. Junior Johnson truly was the last American hero. From his early days running moonshine through the end of his life, Junior wholly embodied the NASCAR spirit. NASCAR Chairman Jim France.